Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll be getting started in just a moment. We're leaving a few extra seconds for people to get logged in. Again, we appreciate you taking your lunch hour to join us today. Perfect. We'll be getting started in probably just a moment or so, looking through people that are logged in. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I see community members from Florence and Reedsport, Bend, the Northern Coast. I see a lot of folks out of Eugene, a few out of Eastern Oregon, several from the Gorge. That's wonderful. Thank you all for joining us today. We should be getting started in just a moment. We'll leave a few extra seconds for people to log on, and we'll be getting started in probably just 60 seconds. Okay, we've got a great number of folks here today. Thank you guys so much for making time. It's wonderful to have you all here for this session for COVID Down Under, how the Southern Hemisphere has responded to a winter pandemic. Some really great lessons that are going to be shared from today. And again, we really appreciate your time. We're going to jump into the content immediately. And I first want to thank Emily with the Columbia Gorge, who's the network manager, for sharing a little bit of this backstory and how this came together, and the phenomenal presenters that we're excited to have here with you today. So Emily, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Alexa. We're very excited about this panel. As you know, the pandemic is one of those incredibly unique experiences that we've shared as an entire world. And so we have this opportunity to be able to see what it was like to experience the pandemic in different parts of the world with very similar experiences, but also uniquely different experiences. And so we're very excited to have two representatives of experts from New Zealand and Australia to talk to us about what their experience has been like, especially because they have experienced the pandemic through the winter months and are just coming out through the spring. So as we turn to winter, we felt like we could maybe learn something from them since they've just been there. A little bit of glimpse into the future, if you will. So our first panelist I'm very excited to introduce is from New Zealand. Anne Lockhart is the CEO of Destination Queenstown. And we chose Queenstown because it has similarities to the Gorge, and you'll hear about that in a second. But Anne has an amazing experience as well, in that she was the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce there and has deep ties to government and amazing experience to bring to us. She also has experience with Oregon. So she was the international representative for Columbia Sportswear, and so she knows us well, which is great because she can translate. Our second panelist is David Evans, and David Evans is with Visit Victoria. And Victoria is the second biggest, or has the second biggest town in Australia, Melbourne, and some surrounding areas that will feel similar to maybe a Portland experience, with surrounding areas coming out into the wine country and such. And he also has extensive experience with tourism and DMOs, and also has experience with both the US and Australia. So we're also very excited to have him with us. Welcome, both of you. Really happy to have you here. So without further ado, I thought we would kick off with the first question, which is, Anne, would you just tell us a little bit about, well, both of you, starting with Anne, tell us a little bit about your area and what it was like when the pandemic hit. Anne, would you like to start?
For sure. Hello and welcome, everyone. And I must say that I do love your area of Oregon. I see Columbia and my heart goes like this. So I had probably about 15 trips, I would say, to Portland and the surrounding area. So very happy to be here this morning. So much has happened here in the last 6 months. It's really hard to even just feel what it was like, and we would have been exactly the same, I guess, as the States, although you're a little bit after us, but number of you will be aware that we went into a total lockdown. I think it was on the 21st of March. We were given a soft warning of that about a week prior, but 2 days formal warning. So, and our government actually followed that all through the levels, from level 4, which is complete lockdown, to 3 to 2 and back to 1. And they often told us, they socialised it the week before, they gave us notice on a Monday lunchtime, and on the following Wednesday, 48 hours later, we would go into whatever that next step was, whether it was up or down. Usually after lockdown, obviously it was a progressive into the stages of level 3, 2 and 1. So our government, and there might be some other questions around that very quickly, but our government responded extremely quickly. They basically had a policy and had all their ducks lined up pretty smartly in terms of what's now been widely known as the wage subsidy. So they rolled that out for all and every businesses. There was virtually no criteria or very little criteria around it, and it meant basically for every full-time, anyone that had a full-time position, that they would pay $500 a week for that role, and then the employer would have to top it up to make it at least 85%, because sometimes 500 would have been someone's full wage, but for other people in more highly paid jobs, it might have been only 50% of the wage. So the onus was on the employer to top it up to 80. As we went through, as the lockdown and the COVID period extended, they came in with another 8-week extension, and then the second lockdown, which didn't happen for everyone, it only happened in Auckland City for another 3 weeks in August. End of July, August, they extended that for another 3 weeks. So basically businesses, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in my presentation, but our businesses at very macro level have managed to survive with the domestic market, even though in Queenstown, 70% of our total spend here is from international. So we're very much looking forward, the very short end of all of that, from Destination Queenstown's point of view, is that we're looking forward to what's been commonly known as the Australian bubble to open and welcome our Australian neighbours, who we didn't realise how much we appreciated and loved until came to COVID. Is that right, David?
So you're very dependent upon tourism in your area, correct? Can you tell us just a little bit about what kinds of things people can do there when they visit?
Yes, we're about 100% reliant on tourism. We are the major game in town. So the impact was, on the face of it, catastrophic. And I come back to the fact that we've had the support of our government, which I know they have in Australia too, and David will talk about that, which has really assisted our businesses with keeping their heads above water. I'll show you a video in a few minutes, and that will give you a very good feel. But we're known, we've just relaunched our brand here to the home of adventure. So Queenstown's also always been known for its outdoor pursuits, and some of those adrenaline filled. And you can do everything here, from bungee jump, jet boating, skiing, snowboarding, climbing, trails, treks. So very much an outdoor lifestyle, not dissimilar, as you say, Emily, to Oregon.
Great, thank you. And you had such a lovely handoff to David.
Yes, thank you, Anne. So thank you for having us, guys, as well. So it's a pleasure to talk about our region and what's been happening down there. I guess there are some similarities to what Anne and New Zealand have faced in terms of Australia. Unfortunately for us in Melbourne and Victoria, we've been the problem children. So 74% of the cases in Australia for COVID have actually come from our state, which is not great. So we've even had other states around Australia pick on us for that reason. So it's been challenging. So if you've read in the news of recent, the actual news cycle has been a little bit more positive towards what has happened in Melbourne. So it was a 111-day lockdown. It was one of the strictest lockdowns that you'll find anywhere in the world. And we went through ebb and flows as well. So, liken it to something like California, where you go a step forward and 2 weeks later you come a step back. We started out that way And then it got to the point where it really just needed to be locked down. So we had aged care facilities, unfortunately, with some pretty bad breakouts. We also had some issues with hotel quarantine, which I'll not talk about anymore, but that made the news as well. So, you know, when all of that happened, I guess, you know, similar to what Anne was saying, the government really got behind it. So not just the state government, the federal government, they employed a system, what they call JobKeeper. JobKeeper, I guess, draws some similarities to PPP in terms of all businesses being able to, you know, furlough staff, but also pay them a very reasonable wage. So when it comes to the tourism operators, that was vital, because without that, they weren't able to retain staff. But if you're a, you know, private guided touring operator or something, they're able to retain their staff, not lose them to other industries or other businesses, so that when things were able to come out of lockdown, they're in a position to scale up effectively. So yeah, it has been pretty challenging, but now it's been 13 days of 0 cases. And I think collectively Australia hasn't really seen any cases over the past few days. So, you know, while it is just completely different to what everyone has been saying up here, you know, it has worked, and it only really worked through what the government was able to facilitate. So small business loans, if you're a licensed venue, you could access funds. You know, in terms of what we've been able to do, you know, despite the lockdown and going through winter where, you know, Melburnians were able to only leave the house for 1 hour per day for exercise or to go to the grocery store. That was the only business that was open. You know, there were $5,000 fines if you left Melbourne and went into regional Victoria, and they were heavily enforced. There's only a few roads out of Melbourne anyway, so they could actually do that. Militarized state borders, things that you would just never, ever anticipate of a destination like Australia. So they took it seriously, but on the flip side, the government really did provide that support that was necessary for people to be able to navigate it. And now that we get back to 0 cases, you know, we've been able to progress and, you know, start some of those campaigns that we've been starting for months now. So it's an encouraging sign. And obviously from an international standpoint, same as Anne, international is actually 35% of the visitor economy. So, you know, it does start with domestic, and then it starts with, you know, intrastate and then interstate travel. But we know that ultimately we need to get to a point where this can be mitigated across the globe with vaccines and rapid testing and so on to get that dollar in, because we all know, and similar to what you guys would experience too, that midweek high yield dollar from international travellers is really vital, and it's really vital to a huge core part of our industry. So yeah, definitely some challenges being faced, but it's looking brighter and sunnier as it gets brighter and sunnier in Melbourne.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm excited to hear about how it looks now for you. But before we get there, I would love to hear from each of you how you responded to the pandemic. I would love to hear what your strategies were for working with businesses and also some of your communications. So now what we're going to do is have Anne walk us through a short presentation, and then have David do the same, and then we'll come back and have follow-up questions around that. So Anne, would you like to take it away?
Thank you, Emily. Just by way of background, and I mentioned this before, but we had spent 2 years formulating our new brand, which I mentioned was the Home of Adventure. We were going to launch this brand. It was about 2 weeks after it was set down for 2 weeks before the COVID lockdown, but we knew what was happening. There was a limitation. I think we had 1,000 people, media, etc., at the top of one of our mountains. And that's something that we're very similar to Oregon, is that we have got a very strong winter season and a very strong summer season here, because we're one of New Zealand's premier ski resorts with 4 mountains within an hour's drive of the downtown area, and that's to the top of the mountains. So anyway, the brand launch did not happen, but what we were able to do immediately after lockdown was we went to the market, because our ski fields were desperate. As you mentioned before, our lockdown happened in winter, to be able to open the ski fields. To the credit of the ski fields, they worked very hard with government to be able to open the ski fields in level 2, which they did, which was not easy, because we still had to practice social distancing on lifts and cafes, etc., etc. Also, we had a domestic market, and we're not totally used to the domestic market, who would all wanted to drive their cars up the mountain and not take public transport, and were at the queues at 8:30. Some of our visitors, you know, from Australia, mostly Australians during winter, a wee bit more relaxed about the day, you know, they might rock up to the mountain about 10 o'clock. So the ski fields really had their work cut out for them. Anyway, what I'll do is, just before I go into the presentation, I'll just show you the video of Queenstown and what we do here, which I think will give everyone a really good feel for the atmosphere here. Thank you.
It's there. A feeling that there's more to do. More things to see. Hear the call from the sacred place. Let it wake your senses from a deep sleep and inspire you to go further than you've gone before. This is the place where adventure cascades down mountains and into bloodstreams. Where each moment invites you to live larger than you've ever dreamed. Here, you'll meet someone new. The person you've always wanted to be. Welcome to Queenstown, the home of adventure.
Thanks, Emily. It's just
I want to hop on a plane.
I just thought I'd take this promotional opportunity to promote Queenstown, but I have to say I'm incredibly lucky, because that view that you saw out on the lake is from my, I can see that from my office window. So we do live in one of the most beautiful parts of the world. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just scoot through a few slides to just literally tell you what Destination Queenstown's response was to COVID. Thank you. I think someone's helping me there. Right, so when the pandemic, I'll just go on to the next page. Sorry, guys. So someone's doing it for me at the other end. So the next one. Yes, so when we, obviously we just mentioned that before, is that we had an unprecedented situation with us. We had to revise our strategy very quickly. We were just about to launch our 3-year business plan. Like everything, you know, it was it all happens at once. So we had to review that and have a look and operate differently. And I guess that at a very simple level, what that means is that those of you who are familiar with the marketing and promotion is that we have what we call the funnel approach to that. So where Destination Queenstown as the Regional Tourism Office worked originally was to have, is to work at the dream and the planning stage, but not at the booking stage. So that was something, that was a profound difference in the way that we operated. So we're able to put, I think it was something like about in the first 3 weeks of our winter campaign, which was just based on that promotional video you saw there, were something like about 126,000 direct referrals to our members. So that was bookings that were made on their websites as a basis of that promotion. Yes, so we had to do a 180 degree pivot, and go into that demand generation phase. Sorry, I'll just the next slide, guys. Thank you. As I said, we had to, it was put upon us too that we had to take, because we represent over 1,000 members. So we've got, I think, about 1,100 members who we directly relate with, that receive our comms every week, etc. And they were very much dependent on us. A lot of our businesses' marketing departments literally folded overnight. So we took that place. So we saw our key areas around communication, obviously, collecting data, giving support to our industry. One of the other things that we did do was with the 2 chambers of commerce. So we've got a sister town called Wanaka, which is, we call Over the Hill. And with Wanaka, we, the 2 chambers, the 2 RTOs and the local district council had a business recovery group which was formed, and we put out comms every day so that we had consistent messaging across the area. So slides, thanks guys. Next slide. This will just give you a bit of an idea, literally, sorry, back one please to the graph. Sorry, go if I was just doing this myself. That's it. So with the, this will give you a pretty good idea of what happened to our economy. So as I said before, we had 70% international, 30% domestic. So we immediately set ourselves a goal to say that of our total market, that our goal was to have 50% domestic market as part of our total mix. So you can see what happened there is that it fell away from February into April to basically nothing. We have seen a rebound. So the school holidays during winter and that ski again gave us a really good rebound. We've recently had a second lot of school holidays again with families visiting, which has given us a bit of a lift in income. But basically our total spend for the former financial year was something like 2.6 billion, and we're budgeting $1 billion for this financial year now. So definitely a fall away in business. Thanks. Next slide. So our response framework, just very quickly. So we obviously had our immediate response. We went into review after lockdown came out, and we are very much into the recovery phase. Yes, and that's, I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment if you just want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what that meant from us as an organisation is that our focus for this year was absolutely to grow demand again as fast as we could. And that was, and we did that, as I said before, by assisting our members both through trade, through consumer to business and business to business, is to recover as fast as we could and capture market share. So basically we're in a competitive situation with the rest of our neighbours in New Zealand. So everyone was promoting come and, you know, play in your own backyard, which we didn't have any other choice to do. In terms of the mid to long term, is that we are key participants in the rebuild of our industry. People very much reliant on us. And there's a lot of talk about what regenerative or sustainable / regenerative tourism looks like going forward. And that is the big part of the conversation. So we're sort of doing 2 things in tandem. On the one hand, we're doing every single thing we can to grow demand for our members and operators, well, not just our members, but all the tourism operators. And on the other hand, we are working within some government frameworks, and our government is leading the conversation about this, about what the future state of tourism looks like. And the reason I say that is that we were having difficulties with social license to operate because we had so many visitors here on some given days, and our infrastructure was definitely starting to creak. So what COVID has done is given us the opportunity to pause, even if it is compulsorily, and look at what plans we can put into place. So just the next slide. actually overseeing that is the next slide, please. So I just talked about that. There's a lot of words on that page, but that basically just illustrates, sorry, back one. So the back one. Yes, so that was just illustrating what I was talking about. That we've got our 4 pillars, our brands, the value, our visitors and community, what we're doing now, what we were doing, what we're doing in 2021, which is reactivating our market as fast as possible. And over there, 23, 24 is that whole future, envisaging what what tourism of the future looks like. So next page, thank you. So this is a bit of a very quick overview of our campaign activity. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but what we did was we started with down at the bottom, literally during COVID, we started with a local campaign. So we wanted our local community to come out and support our operators. So we had a short term, when we could, immediately about 2 weeks after lockdown finished, the hard lockdown, we had a community event where thousands of people came out, and we had the fireworks and bands and whatever. And it was a great opportunity for our community to come together. The next stage up was a regional campaign. So we persuaded our neighbours, our immediate neighbours, such as Wanaka and the south of the South Island, to come and visit us. And then above that, our brand campaign, which we will be rolling out to Australia. Thank you. The next slide. One of the things that we've been able to do to help the industry as a whole, and this has been well received right across New Zealand, is that we've done some demand mapping scenarios over the next 2 to 3 years as to what we expect in terms of the borders opening. So that we've got a conservative and optimistic and mid-range forecast. And that we update probably every 30 days, because the international borders, that the situation there is not moving very fast, but you can see that we are expecting it'll be right into 2023 before all international borders are open to us. The next slide shows you a much more short-term model, and this is a 30-day demand model, and this has been very, very well received by our operators. So what informs this is our major operator, airline Air New Zealand, gives us their capacity figures, a number of the commercial hotel operators, Airbnb, etc., some of the OTAs. So we've got a bit of a view on Booking.com, Expedia, etc., and this drives us. And the reason we've done this is that whilst it's based on accommodation mainly, it gives our activity operators some idea of what's going to happen. You can see the Queenstown Marathon peaks in 2 weeks' time. That's one of our biggest spend days after New Year's Eve. You can see New Year's Eve's not even as big as the marathon. And that actually leads to another point, is that our government during COVID has given our region $8.5 million to promote events, of which one Queenstown, and secure new legacy events, because the government recognised that that's a good opportunity for us to fill beds. Just as a matter of interest, we've got 6,000 commercial beds and 6,000 what we call non-commercial beds. That would be apartments and Airbnb and camping grounds, etc., that we need to fill. So that's what focuses our attention every morning. Just on to the next slide. I'll just quickly finish up here. Sorry, next slide. So just to recap about our future thinking, is that what we are doing, as I said before, is taking the time to think about how people, because we do know New Zealand is a very expensive destination, literally because we're so far away from the rest of the world. There's all the issues about carbon. We will become, I think, perhaps a smaller tourism market going forward, but looking again for maximum visitor days as opposed to, so, the old thing about quality over quantity. So it may ultimately be that we certainly in the mid-term have fewer people here, but they stay longer, and that's certainly where we're targeting all our activity. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go through.
And I just want to say that for those of you following along, we'll be able to ask questions at the end. So if you want to send in your questions or think of them now, we'll be able to get to those later. But I just wanted to thank you, Anne. That was really interesting. Very interesting themes of going from inspiration to really driving demand to working with coordinating with your sister town to coordinate messaging. We had a lot of that here in Oregon as well. And yeah, looking ahead to what you can solve now for when the crowds come back. So fascinating. Thank you. David, do you want to tell us, answer, how did you respond? And what did your communications look like?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm just going to bring up my screen if that's okay. I'll run through a couple of quick things. So I mentioned earlier, just in terms of, we had a lot of stop-start things going on with our destination. And to be honest, the start of our year we thought was going to be the biggest challenge that we were going to face, which was bushfires. So we had a lot of fires, particularly in the area of high country and now in Gippsland, areas that are very similar to the landscape that you guys have up in Oregon. So
I just might throw in a translation: bushfires equals forest fires here. So
that is true. That is true. Sorry, forest fires. But that was that was an awful way to start the year, because 2020 for all of us, we working at Tourism Australia and others, it was always looking towards this year as being the one where we would start to achieve those goals that we'd set out a decade earlier. And it just didn't start out the right way. It wasn't just our state affected; it was many others. So for us, there was a lot of work that had to be done immediately about what do we do to support those regions to make sure that they can recover. And then, I remember being down in Melbourne at the end of February, and I was talking to all of our industry, and we didn't even talk about coronavirus. I mean, in the China session, they definitely did, and we didn't. And so by the time that I had got back to the States a couple of days later, it was picking up steam. And then obviously all of a sudden we had to sort of rethink the whole entire strategy, not just for international, but for domestic as well. And as we went into lockdown, it just put a dampener on all of those plans as to what we, were able to do. So, I'll talk about what we went through, and then also, going beyond that, where we're at now, because the second that we got 0 new cases, we started going back through those steps and opening up has allowed us, to get things out there and start to move some of these campaigns that honestly have been sitting on the shelf for months. So just to go back to what we were talking about, now Melbourne is open. The Ring of Steel, as they called it, which was around the city, has been lifted. Restaurants and bars are reopened. It's 0 cases for 13 days, actually. Things like mandatory masks, across the state, and regional Victoria mirrors now what Melbourne is. But one of the really interesting things that we faced, as I said, we were the problem children, particularly in Melbourne, was that our regions, we have an aging population to some degree in Australia, and there was a lot of concern about health and safety. And so what we had was, even when restrictions were lifted, because it started to improve in Melbourne, and people said, all right, you can now move into the regions of Victoria, very compact state, so it's very easy, an hour, 90 minutes outside of Melbourne, you have a whole wealth of experiences. And again, a lot of those very similar to what you have in Oregon. Was that the sentiment from the locals in regions was not positive towards visitation. So despite the fact that obviously the tourism communities were saying, yeah, we will take them, just the general public going to their council, going to their mayors, and then also to the regional tourism boards, of which we have many in Victoria, we're getting a lot of pushback to say, don't start marketing this place. We don't want people in our restaurants. We don't want people, in my bakery, that type of thing. And as you can see from local sentiment, it's, this is October, this is 19 October. I can tell you it looked a lot worse if you went back a couple of months before that, but you start to see things like optimistic as they were drawing towards the end of this and so on, but it's pretty abysmal. So it was a big task, just in essence, to get people over the fact that, everything that's going on now that you got 0 cases, it is going to be safe. We can get people moving around. Things like mask mandates and so on are important, but it's an ongoing thing for us. So, and ultimately, a big challenge that we had was that we're facing, an immense loss to the visitor economy. So 23.3 billion is what the estimate is. And, for us as well, we're at the starting line. So most of the other states around Australia have already been able to move their intrastate marketing and their interstate marketing. So we feel very behind the 8 ball. And when you had a lockdown, what were we going to promote? I mean, no one could move outside their house. It was really as much of a challenge as anybody has ever seen in this industry. So what we saw was a potential to set up a campaign where we could activate something at a time when intrastate travel is allowed to happen, and then that will extend onto interstate. But there was also the question about, what do we do during lockdown? Do we just do nothing and shutter up and just say, all right, well, we'll have to wait it out? And we didn't. So what we thought was we really needed to put a human face onto tourism. So we always talk about the experiences, whether it's venture tourism or wildlife and wine and those types of things. But we had already had in the works a plan to leverage makers and creators. It's actually the human face of our industry. And it's not just your tour operators, it's not just your accommodation partners. This extended into leather makers in Ballarat and small chocolateries in Port Campbell. People that you wouldn't think have been affected majorly by tourism and really have never been considered tourism operators. We had a chance to bring those personalities forward and put that face on it for everyone in Melbourne, because when we felt very, very isolated by the rest of the country and even the world, it was an opportunity where we could get Victorians to actually band around each other and say we all need to support each other and so on. So that's really what the considerations were, and it was day to day. We get to a point where we think we're going to launch Friday, and then okay, we'd wait another week and 2 weeks and so on. So it has had its challenges, but it's led to some great opportunities. So this is one, that in the height of winter, no one was really able to travel around the state at all. But we decided to launch a campaign that we called Click for Vic. So essentially, as I said, we went out with a big industry survey to everybody, any small business across the state, and said, look, this is what we're going to try and do. And effectively what we had was, this was an opportunity for a campaign that would bring the best of Victoria to your door. If you can't travel, we can bring it to you by way of small businesses. So as I said, it could be a bakery, it could be some of the distilleries and breweries that we have out in region. There's cheese shops and so on. Certain regions grouped together and got products and put them into hampers that people could buy in advance of things like Christmas and so on. And then what we did was we worked with third-party aggregators and e-commerce platforms, so Victorian Country Market, Providore, and so on, and completely overwhelmed them and gave them way too much product to load up. We had to, send our IT guys out to them to look to expand their systems to take in all of the traffic that was driven to them. But it was really, it was a great campaign. We were able to actually move things, get messages out for what people could purchase and what businesses were out there. For our regional tourism boards, we worked very closely with them to say, if at any point, this is now when you align all messaging. So if they were going to launch something, we wanted it to be in a synergy to what we were promoting. That went down to local councils and so on, so that we could all be singing from the same song sheet. So we would come up with a platform that we wanted everyone to leverage. And if we could do it effectively, we could stimulate business. And while this is certainly not your traditional tourism platform, it has absolutely broadens everyone's awareness and perception of what is out in regions that formerly they would dismiss. I mean, Australians are very good international travelers. We are horrific when it comes to exploring our own backyard. So, jump off to Bali, go to Europe, go to the US, all that type of stuff. But if you say, have you gone to the high country or, the Murray River region or something like that? Probably not. So this was a great opportunity to show Victorians what our state actually has to offer. And it works, really, really effectively. So much so that the government has ended up giving us another 9 million to extend this through to January. And as I said, it was about that human face. It wasn't so much about the chocolate at the chocolaterie as much it was about the person. So you can see here what we did with PR was really center around makers and creators, the people that are really creative in our state, which we're known for, an art and cultural hub, to try and drive visitation through saying, we have some of the most creative and innovative people in the world. This is what they do, and tell that story. And that has then lent itself to what we've called Stay Close, Go Further. So this is just launched. So when we got to 0 cases and the Ring of Steel came down, this gave us the ability to go out and push a new direction. And, kind of interesting in, Anne's video that talks about Go Further, that we've kind of even copied that potentially, but that's okay. We're trying to get people to go further. So what this is about is taking the makers and creators concept even further, but it's centered around a drive campaign. We know that we can't really target interstate travelers until the end of the year. So, for Columbia Gorge as an example, you're very close to Portland. This would be a similar concept. This is talking to Melburnians about getting out to region, and it's about regional people coming into Melbourne and getting past, some of the perceptions of going into an urban centre, that they've had, but now with no cases, it's safe to do so. So we lent on culture and creativity. We wanted to build an emotional connection from our residents. And again, it tells that story that tourism's deeper than just, going out for a tour. This is really about, the impact on these businesses. And if leaning on that strength of personality, we think this is going to be a great success. And again, it's an opportunity where RTBs, local councils, small businesses of any type can actually participate. And that's probably one of the biggest learnings, and we'll get to that later, of, what we thought. We thought the tourism world was like this for Victoria, and it's really a lot broader than that. But it really only works if everyone works in unison. If it's a collective effort, and it sometimes doesn't work that way, then you can actually have success in some of the darkest periods. So we've been excited to actually get this going. The creative in terms of Stay Close, Go Further, you can see some of that there, where we had regional messaging and then the metro messaging to get people out of town and so on. So and during winter, we just didn't have a huge opportunity for travel, but now those messages can get out there as we're leading through spring and into summer. So industry engagement, working with partners like RACV, because it's a drive campaign. This is like AAA for you guys, to get those drive journeys, showcase itineraries, and really gear that up and show all these businesses along the way so people can curate their trips. Airbnb, which is obviously a dirty word in the industry sometimes, but you know what, the fact is that was something that we're able to leverage through Qantas to extend reach, because if that's what people are looking for to travel in their bubble that way, it still supports the local community. So we faced challenges there, shall we say, but the reality is that this is the changing environment of tourism. We have to look at all opportunities equally, and what's going to work best for us. So it's been a really interesting time. We'll get into some key learnings, but that's kind of where we're at the moment.
That's great. Thank you, David. That's so interesting. And a lot of the same themes that we're hearing with Anne, where it's a focus on local, which is an obvious need, but that faces of the makers is fascinating. I think, Anne, you also had a similar faces of the businesses in your area as well. I feel like I saw maybe. Really interesting.
Absolutely, and I didn't touch on that too much, but we have, now that we've sort of got the the rebranding collateral out there, we are working on a segment based, looking for opportunities, and I guess that is actually very important. So a lot of people in New Zealand would perceive Queenstown as quite expensive place to go. You might only go once. What we're doing now is going back to the drawing board, and it's probably what we did in previous years, and have a segment approach. So underneath that layer of adventure, and I just wanted to make the note there that it's not all about adrenaline, even though that's our central proposition, but we have what we call soft tourism, like you guys, wine, trails, golf, etc. So we'll be taking a segment approach. And one of our big hairy goals, actually, and that's what we've tasked ourselves with, is that we should become the premier biking area for the Southern Hemisphere. So on equivalent, say, to what Whistler is, so that biking in summer, and it is big for us, but it's not cohesive. So got everything from leisure trails to about 45 manifestations of downhill biking. So we want to be known as a world-class, not just ski destination, but biking one. So, and that's just one of the areas. We've got a collaboration with our golf. We've got 5 international golf courses in the vicinity, so they're all working together to go to market, and we market on their behalf as a collaboration. So a lot of that sort of activity going on.
Great. Yeah, so very interesting similarities. You both are down to 0 cases and are experiencing travel from people and things that we're not quite there yet. So it is interesting to hear what that looks like. But you also both experienced, after coming down to 0 cases, back a spike and having to go back into quarantine. And that is something that we're worried about here, and would love to hear how that was, what that felt like, what you did in response.
Maybe David, you want to go first, because his the Melbourne example, or the Victoria ones, is pretty exceptional, isn't it? In Australasia, what happened there? Yes,
exceptional is certainly one word. Because the thing is that after the initial impact and restrictions that came in, it was kind of like what it's been like in California, that at some point people start to lose faith and trust in what the government is saying, unless you have a really strong action plan and say, these are the set restrictions, and you can actually provide people with enough notice to, capably prepare. And I think, the real challenge was that the second lockdown was so harsh in terms of like really, really limiting what people were able to do. But the strength of why it actually ended up working was the fact that after the first iterations of restrictions came in, they really deepened the amount of communication that went out there. I mean, the Premier got hammered at times for some of the things that he was going out and saying, because it got into a tussle between states and so on. But the reality was, when it came to Victorians, everyone was very well aware of, if we get to this point, this is going to happen. If we get to this point, this is going to happen. There's really no preparing for how hard that shutdown was, outside of the government being extremely transparent and just saying, this is what needs to be done. So, it's different. I know you guys are concerned about lockdowns, and of course that completely makes sense, but it's kind of different, with the healthcare system in Australia that, is government led and so on, that, they can't have, hospitals and so on being overfilled. So, it just worked out that Australia, and I think, and you may agree with New Zealand, it's similar. It was just a different aspect in terms of compliance culture. So things like mask mandates, it was just accepted and so on. And I think there's, in fairness, some challenges up here in terms of how that's going to happen. But, for businesses, some of them, the most creative ones in terms of lockdowns, what they did was they went out and they shot virtual tours, or, they went out and leveraged assets that they already had to try and make sure that they had some content and some news stories to, develop during that time. Phillip Island, no one could actually go there, but they ended up doing this global live stream across the world to show when our little penguins come into the water, from the water at night. So there were some really innovative ways in which companies were able to continue to get solid messages out, despite the fact they'd gone into a second lockdown. The first iteration of that taught them that, all right, if we don't prepare for the next one that may happen, we're going to be left behind. So look, there's plenty of different examples of what they were able to do, but that going virtual, again, using the opportunity to change up what their company looks like. So, group tours, like coaches and so on, they've had to look at adapting. And so many of them are leasing different vehicles, expecting that smaller group tours are going to come back, or they'll have to have limitations on sizing. So they've worked through that period to look at cost and so on. So, as I said, I mean, it's very broad in terms of the application of what people have been able to do, but there are some really interesting stories, and I'm happy to share others with you after this that showcase from the different sectors of the industry how they were able to endure and get through that. Because 111 days, at some point it's like you don't have the possibility of drawing revenue. So it was very, very challenging.
Yeah, and just picking up on David's point there is that actually you're wrong. We've got one community case today, which is worrying everyone. This is in Auckland, where they actually went into a second lockdown, not as hard as the Melbourne one, and for a shorter period, as I mentioned before. But there's been a call. So just to give you an idea, I don't think we like being called that we're a compliant nation, but we basically are. So the Mayor of Auckland has suggested that people don't go into downtown Auckland this morning to work, and to stay at home if they can. And people have done that while they try and find out what the cause of that is. So that's one case in the whole country. But they'll, the tracing is, people are, they pretty much follow the rules. And I guess that we've got the advantage of being both Australia and New Zealand, but islands at the bottom of the world. So that has certainly helped. Plus, our natural disposition to conform and do what's the bit for the greater good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's a lot easier as an island destination. I mean, Australia is as big as the US, but 24 million people. It is easier to manage and mitigate that when you know that you can easily lock borders down, stop flights and so on. So, we just know that the situation in the US is just so vastly different and creates different challenges. So, it's interesting. But as you say, and it's crazy when like one case pops up and you think from the US perspective, like, okay, let's move on. But honestly, it's terrifying to think that you could get it in Australia, because honestly, you could end up in the paper with your name saying David Evans actually has coronavirus, you know, because there's one case. It's just, it is different and crazy, but you know what, these lockdowns have worked. But going back to the original point, it comes down to government. You know, the communication was not so effective at the start, and it got a lot better, and people knew where to find the information, and they're able to get that out fast and act promptly and be able to do it with strong effect. I think that was really what was really key. And ultimately, people knew going into the second lockdown that they had support. The JobKeeper program would be enduring for them. And there were also all of those grants available for the tourism industry, which really helped.
Yeah. So stronger, more extreme lockdowns, but also support financially and,
yes,
and shorter.
Yeah. And we've got a lot, great, I don't know if some of your viewers here today heard about our Prime Minister, but she's sort of made her name for herself on the international stage by being incredibly clear in her communications and very compassionate. And we've got a population of only 5 million here in New Zealand, and I'm going to say that probably 3 million of them tuned in every single day to the Prime Minister, not just the Prime Minister of the country, speaking to the nation at 1 o'clock every day with her Chief Health Minister. Everyone listened, took notice, whatever, and that's got us into sort of an enviable position. However, having said that, of course, you know, people do say, and it's the same for Australia, I'm sure, is that can we live, you know, like, well, we can't have close borders indefinitely. So, so obviously the next option, or the next thing that cab off the rank, is to open our border with Australia, which both governments are literally talking about on a day-to-day basis, and that'll be a very good test case.
Yeah, and that bubble you're talking about is to create a bubble as if they're one country between the two.
Yeah, that's right.
We have just 8 more minutes, and I just want to let folks know who are listening that you have a chance to add your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I'd love, in the meantime, if any of those come in, for you to just wrap up with what would you advise? What are your top lessons? What would you suggest to us as we're going into winter?
And you can go first on this one.
All right. So these are not my words, but head of the New Zealand tourism body, Tourism New Zealand, came and visited us pretty early well, he didn't actually, I'm telling folks, there we were Zoom meeting like everyone else. But I remember him saying this, and I've followed this through with the COVID, is that all we can deal with is literally what we've got in front of us. So there's, you know, albeit that I'm just talking about, we hope that the Australian borders opened yesterday, is that really what we've got to deal with is a domestic market. And so we have to make the best fist of that we can, which is what we have done. You know, our finance minister came out and said, we will not be able to save every job in every business. So what we've seen businesses do is, there's not many that have failed, fortunately. Although the longer the closed borders go on, the more we may see that. But up until now, what businesses have done is either what I call, instead of saying downsize, have right-sized their business. So yes, there have been casualties, staff have been let go, but most of them have managed with the domestic market and our help in that to keep their heads above water. And so I guess that's my major, you know, there's no point in saying what if. Yes, we have to have an eye for the future, but literally, what is the best thing we can do today, you know, and that is to grow demand and support our communities at the same time.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think from our part, one of the, you know, key outcomes and also learnings was, look, every disaster or, you know, challenge that we face in the industry does provide an opportunity for a clean sheet. So for all businesses, you know, big or small, it does allow people to go back to the drawing board and say, you know, what is it that, you know, who do we target? Which markets do we target? We've seen a number of businesses shift from a Southeast Asian focus to now be looking at UK, Europe, and the US. And what that means is that they have to overhaul their offering completely. So, you know, despite everything that's going on, there are opportunities that come out of this. I think from our perspective, what it allowed us to do was take a clean sheet of the relationship we have with RTBs. And obviously you guys have a range of those that then filter up to the Travel Oregon, and look at that relationship and say, everyone was working in silos. When everything was humming along, surprisingly, we were less inclusive of each other and not really looking at everything everyone was doing. But that did give us the opportunity to look at the systems and structures of how everyone works and what challenges they face. And that was the only way that we were going to get a campaign out that made sense. And obviously when we had people looking at buying in and making the one pot bigger, we found a way and a system that we believe will be enduring in terms of how we work more closely with those bodies and how we communicate, because communication is always key. And I think for industry, it was making sure that anything that we did was inclusive. As I said, I mean, we took down the tourism lens and we made everything broader in terms of its applicability, and say, look, if everyone wants a piece of it, you've got a shot. In saying that, it had to be a very set criteria because some things weren't the right fit. So again, doing all the work in advance and then clearly communicating at once, making sure all the resources were available, was absolutely critical. So for us, there's some of the learnings. And as I said, I mean, those businesses that have looked to adapt, and others that have seen, like touring companies that have looked at Click for Vic, they've found out businesses in their local area they weren't aware of. And so now they're changing up their offering to be more inclusive of some of those businesses they would have driven by or walked by, a million times. So again, those opportunities are there. If you do go into a lockdown, there's nothing better than to take that insular look and say, well, maybe I need to be doing something different. We're all seeing trends. For us, we think younger travelers are going to be traveling sooner, just because of less health concerns, less economic concerns. So we need to shift our creative look and feel. We have to make sure that ATEC, which is our industry body in Australia, who's developed a COVID Safe program. COVID Safe is not sexy in terms of putting it on your website and so on, but it's absolutely essential. So I think every business has to look at a certification program, look at eco certifications or anything that you can do that leverages trends of sustainability, wellness, health and hygiene, again, not sexy, but required, and make sure that all of your operators that work with you and book with you are aware of that. And that is front and center, because that's the level of confidence that consumers need to see in your product. And we believe that's what they're going to look for. And destinations like yours stand to do really well because it fits the mold of what everyone's saying they want to do when they can travel. So just put that out in front, and that's what we've seen our operators do.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights, both of you. You have amazing examples as well from each phase that's needed. So from 100% online to reaching out to locals to really starting that wonderful thing that we're looking forward to when things open up, when we have zero. So one day. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Really appreciate your time, and it was delightful to get to know both of you. Alexa, do you have anything that you'd like to say to wrap things up?
We just want to thank you all for your time, and Emily, especially for coordinating David and for presenting. It's phenomenal to kind of get a crystal ball into what the future may hold for us and how we can be proactive with some of the best practices you guys have shared that can really make a difference for making a safe state, but at the same time recognizing that travel is an economic driver to the majority of our communities. So thank you guys both for your time.
Thank you.
Emily, I'll pass it back to you to wrap.
Okay, well, thank you. Yes, we have a great list here for to share with others as well, and this will be on recording so people can have a look and learn even later than today. So thank you. Any last words you'd like to say?
I would just pick up, I was just thinking there, David, that was a really good wrap up. And the one point I would pick up out of that, or strong point, is that, yes, it is all about collaboration. I know it seems a bit of a jargony word, but we're definitely having conversations with people that we didn't have before because we saw ourselves as being competitors. And I think that that word collaboration and working together is where the future is for us. So it's one of the brighter things, positive things that's come out of COVID, because I see us working completely in a completely different way going forward.
Agree. And also I just want to commend you, David, for going through that whole topic without using the word pivot.
You know what, I was just going to say that I'm proud of myself. I didn't use it once, so I'm trying to stay away from those buzzwords.
Well done.
That's over it.
Thank you.
Thank you guys again for your time. We wish you the best, and we'll be in touch soon. This recording will be available online. We'll send it out through Emily as well. Take care.
Likewise. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.